Welcome. We're on to our last paper of this session, and it's on, as you can see, the coaching skills for conflict resolution. So another fun topic, I think, to keep us very focused, and hopefully we're going to learn a lot from Yannick. So the speaker, as you can see here, Yannick Jacob, existential coach. So this portfolio career here now. Existential coach, positive psychologist, mediator, coach trainer, supervisor, and he was the former program leader, the MSc Coaching Psychology at UEL in London. He works with anybody. That's very good. That's good to know. He works with anybody who considers themselves in a position of great responsibility. So a few politicians could benefit with your help there. To gain clarity, resolve conflict, build resilience, and navigate their life and career. So over to the resolution.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see a healthy turnout and people actually coming in to talk about conflict, because that's not what the data suggests. So it's nice to actually see that happening. Can I just have a quick show of hands? Who here is a coach? Who here works in organizations? And that might be... Okay, great. All right, so first of all... interesting. There we go. That's an easy one. Have you experienced conflict in the workplace, or perhaps the coaches in your personal life if you don't work in organizations? Nobody has experienced any conflict. Yeah, that would be nice. That's my next question. Would it be nice to not experience any conflict? Is there anybody here who would rather not have any conflict? Yeah, so rather, then there's another one, which is there anybody here who actively creates conflict? It's okay, you can show your hands. You know who you are. I'm sure you're very popular. I'm joking, but to not joke, I would say I hope you're very popular. Because this is what I invite you to do today, is most of you will be asking, well, it depends on what you mean by conflict. And I want to kind of broaden that picture of what conflict can actually mean, so that we can value it and perhaps embrace it as something that we can use, as something that is actually crucial, very important to the movement and growth of any person or team or organization. So just take a moment, when you see these words or you hear them, how do you experience that? And from the reactions just now to those questions, I know there seem to be a lot of people in here that have a more positive association with these words than maybe usually people have. Because I don't like to be disagreed with, but I value it. Because when somebody does disagree, they invite us, or hopefully they invite us, to a conversation. And in that conversational space, I think we can grow and learn something. But our attitude towards conflict is crucial in that sense. And I want to argue today around how coaching skills, and you don't have to be a trained and professional and certified coach, but how coaching skills can help us open that space of opportunity and possibility up. A young man once left his homeland, a land where the football is strong and the humor is precise. The words "I love you" can sound like a threat, allegedly. But more importantly, the people are quite direct. You know, Germans tend to, speak what's on their mind more. They seem to be more willing to challenge you, and don't want to say beating around the bush, because I don't want to give it much of a value judgment. But a fact seems to be that more people just say things as they are and as they mean them. So when my Mexican wife came back home and said I had the worst day ever, then I got really nervous, because I literally thought it was the worst day ever. I take that I had to do some translating. Similarly, when I came to the UK as a German, I had to do some translating, because some of the things I would say just seemed outright rude. When I didn't really get it, I thought I was just being direct, and I thought directness is a sign of respect, because then you can know exactly what I mean. So I had to do some adjustments, and so I experienced my fair share of conflict over the last 15 years. I went on to study positive psychology, which arguably looks a lot at what happiness is and harmony perhaps being part of that. But I've also studied existentialism. This is where my coaching approach is informed by, and arguably that's a philosophy of conflict. We're looking at inner conflicts, dilemmas, the paradoxes that we carry around as a result of being human in the world with other humans. You know, we're essentially different to everybody else. Even biologically identical twins see the world from different perspectives and grow up to be different people. So existentially, we're all in conflict with each other all the time. So that's quite interesting when we view contact from that perspective. So that was kind of my journey into coaching, and having had a lot of coaching hours, thousands of clients, having been in conflict situations, my training and work as a mediator, I got to experience a lot of conflict happening in the room, how it shows up. And I got really interested in people's attitude towards conflict. At some point I lived with 7 other people in a house, and I learned a lot about politics, I learned a lot about conflict, and I learned a lot about how people are avoiding it and how I started to avoid it. At some point I came home visiting a friend in Berlin, and we went to this exhibition. And after about an hour and a half in the exhibition, I wanted to leave. But instead of wanting to leave and saying I want to leave, I said, I think we've seen everything now, have we? And my friend called me out and said, Yannick, if you want to leave, you can just say so, you know. If he would have said, actually there's 3 more other rooms and I'd love to see them, I might have actually gone with it and then, despised him for the rest of the day. But I kind of remind myself of the value of conflict, and I think in these kind of situations it's a good reminder how differently we might deal with that. So again, perhaps just have a moment of reflection of how you approach conflict individually. I want to talk a little bit about what conflict is, why is it inevitable, how it can be embraceable, some solutions versus solutions, things that work better or not so good. But most of the time I will dedicate to how we can use coaching skills, quickly what some of the most important coaching skills are, and how we can put that into, I put best practice in quotation marks because it's arguable whether there is a best practice, but certainly good, what I would consider good practice. And if we have some time, a word on mediation and the mediation process, how it relates to coaching. The cost of conflict is considerable. There's a great report. I mean, now it's 12 years old, but I think the numbers have not changed as much as I would have wanted them to. But I cite that report there because it's very full. 359 billion is the cost ever estimated in the US. If we take those 2.8, almost 3 hours per week that US employees spend on dealing with conflict on the average wage. 85% of employees deal with conflict to some degree, and about a third in Germany, funnily enough, I think it's 56%, say they always or frequently do so. So that's an interesting one because I want to go to this one first, because in the UK, the attitude towards conflict seems to be different. What the data shows is that while people report witnessing less conflict in the workplace, the time they spend dealing with a conflict and the damage that comes from it, the experience of negative emotions that people have as a result of conflict, they match the average. They match all the other countries. But it seems like, I love that picture, I think, of Giselle earlier, with that guy who had the head in the sand. Yes. I chose a bit more politically neutral picture, where everybody's just kind of going about their day. I think there's an attitude, and this is what the data shows, there's an attitude of not really acknowledging it. And I think that's a missed opportunity. Regardless, what often are the results of conflict are a series of elements that you don't really want in your workplace or in your personal life. So I mentioned, when I say conflict and ask those questions, have I had a fist fight in the last 2 weeks? No, probably not. Has there been some disagreement of some sort where somebody voiced different opinions and hence we are in conflict? Or are there other people at the workplace? It's a very broad range of what conflict can be. So I think it's important to kind of think about what do we mean when we say conflict. And we ask those questions, particularly if they're questionnaire-based. It's very easy to get answers that might or might not explore what we're actually trying to understand. I actually like, for once, the Wikipedia definition of conflict, or what they write about conflict, because it points out the difference in beliefs, or when beliefs or actions of different people or members of a group are either resisted or found to be unacceptable. So it shows that we can clash, and when we have different ideologies, we clash and we are technically in conflict. What Strasser and Randolph wrote is that this is intrinsic to human beings. It's impossible to be conflict-free. It's just not something that is ever going to go away, because we're people. So I don't think we can transcend that and then live in peace for the rest of our lives. I think if we would, we would become a lot more flat than we could have. I think part of what makes it exciting to be human is that we have those frictions and those tensions, and that from that we grow and evolve. I think it's part of why we are as a species where we are, for better perhaps than for worse. And Sartre famously said, hell is other people, in his play No Exit. And he pointed out the existential kind of isolation. Other people are a reminder of our otherness. So we can't help but compare ourselves to other people just because they're around. And so that's why I think the existential perspective on conflict is quite helpful, even though this quote sounds quite negative and something perhaps to avoid. But actually, we can appreciate other people if we take that existential stance on conflict. We can have conflicts within us, between individuals, within groups, between groups, and just another reminder that there's some conflict that is resolvable. There's a lot of conflict that we can actually either resolve or at least manage. Some conflict we can't, but we can use it depending on how we deal with it. Hegel has been talking about not conflict, he hasn't used the terminology of conflict much, but what he's pointing out is we need an antithesis to our synthesis in order for there to be movement. This is a constant spiral, and you see it spiraling up. And I think David mentioned that spiral as well. We're going in loops. Teams go in loops, individuals go in loops, and we need those loops. And those loops are usually characterized by a thesis and then an opposing antithesis. And if we deal with it well, we can synthesize it into the next level of whatever evolution we're looking for. So often, conflict is met by being rejected or projected back, which means we just kind of ignore it and go about our business. Limited value there. Often we find conflict being projected up, so we just kind of hand it up to the chain of responsibility. This is not mine, this is not my responsibility, so somebody else is responsible for this, and I let somebody else deal with it. Also not particularly productive. Once we identify with the conflict, take on some responsibility and own it, we can start to understand it and recognize it, do something about it, and start to help ourselves as well as other people to cope with it, to manage it, perhaps to resolve it, but certainly use it for our advantage. That's quite a mature way of dealing with conflict. And I think it's important to, when we get to how can we use coaching skills to approach conflict more productively, to distinguish between coaching and using coaching skills. Because coaching is an unregulated profession, and that is a blessing and a curse, because anybody can call themselves a coach, start printing a business card and start coaching, or do what they think coaching is. We've mentioned evidence-based coaching a lot, and I think it's important to have a process, to have a framework for coaching, because I think it makes us better coaches and it gets our clients better value. However, many people naturally have some of these coaching skills. They have learned them in their past, or the way that they lived their lives, the way that their education went, what their parents were like, primary caregivers, friends, mentors. We can learn a lot of these coaching skills without being a professional certified and trained coach. So while coaching is usually delivered by a professional coach, coaching skills, anybody can utilize them. Managers, leaders, HR professionals, your neighbor. Anybody can use coaching skills and utilize them for whatever purpose they choose. Coaching tends to happen as a part of a package or a series of sessions. I know some of the coaches today delivered a lot of one-off coaching sessions, and it can be particularly helpful. But there's a clear framework. You know, this is going to be a coaching session, and this is how I'm going to be relating to you today. Whereas using coaching skills can be done ad hoc, perhaps very little contracting, but still there's a lot of value in bringing those skills in. Usually there's no dual relationship when a professional coach is coming in from the outside into the organization. That is really helpful because you're coming in with a clean slate, but you also have to build the relationship from anew. So there's pros and cons with that. It can be quite complicated to manage dual relationships if you are the coach and also the manager, or perhaps also a friend, and then you put your coaching hat on. It can be difficult to manage those blurred boundaries. So coaching requires considerable training and expertise to become really good at it. Coaching skills, it's teachable in a short amount of time. You can do a weekend course or perhaps even an afternoon, and if you already bring a core set of skills that I'll be talking about in a minute, just to give you a better idea, you can already help somebody out quite a lot, and that's why there are a lot of kind of what they call natural coaches, or I've heard people talk about being an intuitive coach. Which often means I have no training whatsoever, but I can really help you out. I used to be quite protective of my academic space. It's like, no, I invested so much time to become a coach, and you can't call yourself a coach. Actually, now I'm quite appreciative that there's a lot of people helping other people. What's important to me is that you do the framing of your space. It's like, this is who I am, this is the kind of work that I do. If you're open about what you can and cannot provide, and you don't tell somebody that you have something that you don't, and your client can make an informed decision based on what you told them, whether to work with you or not. For me, that's fine. But I think clients need to ask more questions about who they're working with and what they bring to the table. In high-stakes conflict situations, I think it's really helpful and recommendable to bring in somebody with appropriate training. Again, I think it might be, given that the relationship is so important in coaching, important, both actually. If you have somebody coming in with a strong relationship, it can be really helpful. It can potentially be much more helpful than having 10 years of training. When I say coaching skills, I mean rapport building trust quite quickly. Building that space and that relationship is just so crucial to the coaching, to any kind of coaching process and conflict resolution process for that matter. Being non-judgmental, I'm talking about listening skills, say a bit more in a minute. I'm talking about knowing when to support, when to challenge, when to explore, maybe when to suggest something. I'm talking about being quite self-aware, what's going on for yourself, not just in the space, but in general. The use of process, being able to manage a conversation and lead a client through such a conversation is really helpful. And using your knowledge, applying the knowledge from fields such as coaching psychology. So here is some very practical advice. This is more on a macro level, which is promoting a culture of constructive conflict. Don't ignore it, use it. There's a lot of potential in it. If you have a dedicated and well-trained HR professional that is dealing with conflict situations, if they're quite respected in the organization anyway, that has shown really, really good results, and people in the organization tend to really appreciate that. I've come across organizations where somebody had to do that job, and they didn't like the job, and they didn't want the job, and people don't trust them. In that case, it's not a particularly useful thing to do. But I would encourage anybody in an HR function. This is an amazing space to exist in. I've always been fascinated by being in those kind of conflict situations, particularly because it's not my conflict. I remember that moment in time in my early mediation work when I realized, oh, this is not my problem. This is great, actually, because I can help you sort this out. And the stakes for me are not particularly high because I do the best I can to help you resolve this, but I don't need to suffer from the anxiety of being within the conflict. So I find this work fascinating, and if you find that fascinating too, or you can potentially see the excitement that lies in helping people resolve or manage conflict, make amends, this is it's a job that often people don't want to do. So coaching or counseling offerings, spot coaching that Wendy mentioned, having somebody that you can draw on and just have a vent, or like having a place where you can talk about conflict situations, where you're not being met with judgment, is incredibly valuable. You know, if that's counseling or mentoring or coaching, having somebody, having a space is really helpful for people to deal better with conflict. And what came difficult for me in the beginning, what now comes quite naturally to me, is assume the best in people. Alain de Botton from the School of Life once wrote that people are almost never mean. They tend to be anxious. And it comes out in ways that you might interpret as malicious or evil or all kinds of other things that I won't repeat. But people tend to be anxious. So for me, assuming that there's a human being doing the best they can really allows me to tune into somebody from a position of, you're trying hard, you know, to do a good thing, whatever that good thing means for you. That's what I'm curious about. And if you meet people from that perspective, you know, that non-judgmental, I think you're trying hard, you know, and you can appreciate that. If people are met with that attitude, they tend to open up a lot more. And opening up and building that relationship of trust, then you're halfway there. A word on, there's some pros and cons to working with somebody from the outside versus working with somebody who's already part of your organization. Somebody who's already part of your organization, you already have an existing relationship depending on where the organization you are. It can be really beneficial if it's somebody you know and trust already, but it might also do the opposite. So often it can be a benefit from an outsider coming in because they're coming with a fresh perspective. They don't make any assumptions at the time. They're coming in new and they ask the right questions. Somebody from the inside can equally have advantages because of that existing relationship. I always go on about contracting to my students, the importance of framing the space, which I mentioned earlier, having a conversation about the conversation that you're going to have. What kind of role am I embodying right now? Am I talking to you as your manager, or as your friend, or as a coach, or as a mediator? What are your responsibilities? What are mine? I think that's incredibly important, and that allows you to create that space of trust. And everybody's clear on why they're here for and what you're trying to do for them. Being on the same page, incredibly important. I talked a lot about the importance of the relationship. I'll leave it at that. There's 4 levels of listening, and when I've learned something about, if I had to say one thing about the mediation process and what I took from it, conflict often, like surprisingly often, gets resolved or managed or just kind of disappears in terms of mattering, is when somebody feels that they've been heard. And there's an art and there's skills in making somebody feel heard. And there's different levels of doing that. You can provide a space, merely a space where somebody can talk is already valuable. At another level, you can accurately listen, which means you're reflecting back, you're summarizing, you're paraphrasing, so that the speaker hears themselves talk in somebody else's words. You know, then you definitely know your words got heard and the meaning has been grasped. Beyond meaning and words, there lies feelings and emotions. So if you can listen at that level and reflect back the feelings and emotions that you pick up from somebody, it's like, oh, that must have been hard, versus, wow, that must have been really hard. It's a different level of being listened to. And at the 4th level, you're listening to things that are at the periphery, that you can barely pick up, that maybe are not in the words. Maybe the words say something, but the emotions say another thing. Maybe you pick up on a nervous twitch in the face, and you start pointing it out, and it helps somebody, like, oh wow, I can't believe they're pointing that out. My very first coaching session, my coach pointed out something that I didn't think he was able to hear. I didn't even want to hear what I was saying. I didn't think I was saying it, but he picked up on something, and it really helped to be heard. Not just by the coach, but me hearing myself. So really good listening is a prime skill in using coaching for conflict resolution. Finding common ground, whether that's your personal or your professional why. Presenting, exploring is one of those key skills. You go dig deeper behind the surface of what somebody is bringing into the space. So you figure out, what is this really about? The conflict, when people go to court, it's rarely about money. Sometimes it is, but often it's about something else. So that's another big takeaway from my work with conflict is, what is this really about? Why are we here? And the GROW model often gets a bad rap of being quite simplistic and too performance-oriented. I think it's almost impossible not to use the GROW model in some form or another. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, we tend to talk about the goal first, then about the reality, and we figure out what the options are, and then we talk about a way forward. We're talking about where or who do you want to be, where or who are you now, what's the gap, and how can we address it so you move forward. It's impossible to not use that for a change process in some way or another. So when we talk about conflict resolution, it's useful to explore where they would like that to be. How do you see this? Where do you want to get to in regards to this conflict? You want to manage it, resolve it? What would it look like if it were resolved? So it's helpful to start with the end in mind. This is the funnel model by Monica Hannaway. I won't go into all the details, but the basic premise here is that it's a back and forth, an ebb and flow of tuning in to your client or tuning into the person that you're trying to help. Really put yourself into their frame of mind, put yourself into their shoes, listen to them empathically, bracket everything that you think you know about the situation, and try to see it and feel it from their position. If you do that well, the person you're talking to will feel completely understood. You're completely on their side. You're in their shoes. And then you tune out, and that often even happens physically when I do it. And then all of what you know about the situation, you yourself again, you have access to everything that you know, and you can start bringing that in. You can perhaps gently challenge somebody on some of the assumptions that they've made. Bring in a certain model or process that you have learned. Or perhaps you have talked to the other party in conflict, and they have given you permission to share some of their perspective. And then you might be tuning in again when you help the person explore something. So that back and forth from tuning in and tuning out is really helpful when it comes to helping somebody resolve conflict, because you can both be with your client and on their side, and also ultimately on the side of resolving the conflict. Quick word on mediation. How much time do you have? Oh, excellent. Quick word, super high success rates. There's some good research. We certainly need a lot more research. But it's astonishing how successful the mediation process is, which in essence shares a lot of coaching skills. It's a process where you put the parties in conflict together, then talk to them separately, and then bring them together in essence again. And you sign an agreement at the end of it that is valid in front of a court. In essence, all of these coaching skills are in there. So if you have a very high stakes conflict, it's very helpful to think about the value that mediation can offer, particularly the co-mediation model where you work with somebody from within the organization and a trained mediator from outside. And I'll just leave it at that. Take home messages. Conflict is inevitable. If managed badly, the price is very high. Mediation is a really good idea. Coaching skills can be used by anybody to help resolve conflict, and promoting a culture of valuing conflict and adopting a mindset that is constructive, that will really help. So ultimately, revisiting I disagree, if that goes together with coaching skills and the right attitude towards conflict, it's a real opportunity for growth and movement. Thank you very much.
Time for a question. Any questions? Nope. Straight there. Your second one today, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, your question.
Yeah.
Well, anecdote first.
Yeah. do stand up there so we can all hear. Thank you.
I'm just wondering about the use of assessments. You can get conflict assessments that can help identify conflict styles and modes. Is that which is mainly what I've done so far? I'm just wondering how much you value them, or whether you just prefer kind of see where it goes approach.
I think they can be incredibly useful depending on how they're being received. So I don't generally like to use them because I want to build that relationship first instead of giving somebody a questionnaire to fill out. I have some pre-mediation questions where somebody can give me a bit of context, but I'd like to meet people with a blank slate and kind of explore that. However, I know plenty of mediators who use these kind of scales and assessments with great success. So it's a matter of style, I think.
Time for one quick question with a quick answer.
Well, that was pretty
No,
quick.
that was quick enough. Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you.
Oh, there's a bunch of references, by the way, if you want to look stuff up.
Will you be submitting it for downloading
I will,
the website?
yeah.
Okay, fine. So it will be available on the website.